Hello and welcome back everyone for day 2 of developing a coordinated response to Phragmites management. Just in a minute here to share my screen. Okay. Anyone see that? Yeah, looks okay.
Sorry, Vicky, you gotta switch your display at the top, display settings. Yeah, just go to full screen again.
Oh.
Just put your presentation in full screen again.
Yeah.
Hit 1 minute. Okay, at the top there where it says display settings, click on that. Swap presenter and slideshow.
Okay.
There we
So
go.
now you see it?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, great. So yesterday we heard from a number of speakers on the theme of a coordinated approach to Phragmites management. So Vari reviewed some key takeaways from the Phragmites guidebook, including the importance of establishing a working group, engaging with First Nations, and funding opportunities. And then we heard from Janice, who provided some examples of successful control projects happening across the province at sort of grassroots level, and how people who are really passionate can get together and create change in the community. And also Jacob Kluza provided an overview of NCC's invasive species program in the Saugeen Peninsula and the collaborative approach they've taken and engaged with different groups like First Nations. So for just to go over today's schedule, Kyle Boroman from NCC will pick up where Vari left off and review the regional plan guidebook. And then today we're going to learn a lot about permits and authorizations from Tom Cowan at MECP, and then overall implementation from Brett Norman at NCC. So like yesterday, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So write all your Q&A like yesterday in that tab. That's the third tab from the right. And put your questions there. It's a great way for us to just keep everything organized, and you can upload questions there. And just so you know, day 1, the recording is now available on the OIPC YouTube channel. So Emily will provide a link to it that you can access to see the recordings for day 1. And we'll also have day 2 there later. And at the end, again, we'll have some time for networking. We might have some time permitting for Q&A a little earlier in the day if we're early, like yesterday. And just wanted to remind people about the quiz as well. There's if you're interested in getting the final certificate of completion and you've attended live for both days, you can complete the quiz and get your certificate of completion. And there's also a SurveyMonkey evaluation form for what you thought of the past 2 days. We'd love to hear your feedback. When we do future webinars, it really helps to know what you thought. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Kyle Borman up to the stage. And hi, Kyle. So I'll just
Hello.
Stop sharing it. So I just wanted to introduce Kyle. So Kyle is the acting director of habitat restoration for the Nature Conservancy of Canada and is involved in several landscape scale Phragmites programs. While relatively new with NCC, Kyle has had the opportunity to gain over a decade of experience in delivering various control programs for invasive aquatic plants in Ontario. This work spans the private, academic, and NGO sectors, as well as the opportunity to deliver chemical, mechanical, and biological control programs across the province. So welcome, Kyle. And again, if anyone's new today, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. So you can take it away.
Okay, thanks so much, Vicky. Does everything look good so far? Everything's up on screen as it should be?
Yeah, I see your screen.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for making it back for day 2 of our webinar on the regional planning guidebook that Vari and some folks here at NCC and our partners through Green Shovels have put together. Really appreciate Emily and Vicky taking on the lead to host this through the Remo platform, and it's been a pleasure getting to know another, I guess, meeting space and video conferencing system. So anyway, just to kind of recap a little bit of what we talked about yesterday, we covered off some of the initial topics in the guidebook. So Vari had given an overview of some of the main components of the guidebook. In the first little bit, not text verbatim from what's there, but kind of highlighting some of the key points. And really our interest here is for folks to be able to use the guidebook for their own use and, be able to kind of explore that, but, making sure we're covering off those key points. And we also heard from a couple guest speakers. We heard from Janice Gilbert and Jake Kluza, as Vicky had mentioned, and likewise today we're going to have a couple of breakout sections within this guidebook as well that we'll cover off. So really similar theme to yesterday, and we had a really healthy questions component at the end, and looking forward to that again. So please feel free to include those questions in the Q&A, and if you feel like ranking ones that other people have already put up, it kind of provides that prioritization for us to work through the list. So, basically, we'll give another overview. This is the second half of the book, but encourage you to visit greenshovels.ca in order to get a copy. There is going to be a new version that's coming out with some graphic design updates, as well as a couple of material updates, just adding some extra components to the guidebook. Really, the greater bulk of the information is not going to change. And there are some little updates that are coming. And once that version's available, we'll find a way that, and I'm sure that through Remo or through OIPC, we'll find a way to get this into your hands once it's available. As well, we will be sharing this on the greenshovels.ca website. So without any further ado, let's see if my slides will move forward. Oh, okay. So I'm gonna have to get tricky here. Okay, so first thing we're gonna talk about, so where we had kind of left off yesterday, we had kind of scoped our problem. We've identified, the need to develop a working group, having that Indigenous engagement and community building to, develop a fully comprehensive working group. We've talked a little bit about how to scope out the work, who's kind of on your team, in different aspects, how to deliver these projects. And so we'll take it to the next step. And so, once you have your funding kind of in place and you've got your team kind of pulled together, it's kind of that next step when we're ready to prioritize how to move forward with the program. So embarking on Phragmites management project can be overwhelming, but remember, it is a long-term commitment that even, it's going to take multiple years typically to deal with those more aggressive stands and those, especially from a landscape perspective. So the bigger the area, the more complication, the more, puzzle solving you kind of have to do to determine, the best approach to delivering program. And so with this in mind, just keep in mind that since it is a long-term commitment, that even modest amounts of successful management are really better than nothing. Every patch that's managed results in less available seed source, or say rootstock source that could potentially be spreading into other areas. And really it helps us get closer to our goals. So even doing the work, showing, and we'll talk a little bit about monitoring and reporting and different aspects later, but initially that aspect of pulling together your plans is really the best way to start. And so really, prioritization is key in this sense. So some of the tips that we break down when it comes to prioritization within the guidebook, well, let's just start with breaking it down. So in areas that are going to be really, really dense with frag, or you have a large area, consider using a phased frag approach, I guess, and identify and define where the boundaries are of the work that you want to do. This will lead into your implementation plan, which is, we'll talk a little bit about implementation as well. But breaking it down into a phased approach, you're eating the whole elephant, I guess, bite by bite, rather than trying to unhinge your jaw like a snake. And so from there, we want to figure out, the best way to go about it. We know that frag has no boundaries. So when we're prioritizing the work that we have, let's think about multiple ownerships of a Phragmites patch. This could be along a roadside and then into a farmer's field, and how we're going to go about managing that. And thinking about breaking down that phased approach, is it hitting the roadside? Obviously you want to have that field, if it's on that other property, those routes are all connected. You want to be able to impact that, or eventually the work that you did on that roadside is going to go to waste. So, identifying, how you're going to go about this. Maybe it's, you can treat the roadsides this year. You don't have time for the landowner engagement or the funding to do that larger piece. But as you're doing your mapping, identifying where it's crossing boundaries may be a good way of helping with that prioritization. As well, knowing that it has no boundaries, it really adds that complexity. The more landowners, the more, I guess, jurisdictions, if it's a municipal versus a federal or provincially owned property, you're going to have different complexities that come with that. Keeping in mind, we're taking bites of the elephant where we can. Sometimes we can take big chomps, but we're going to do what we can. We're going to manage frag where we can start. So some examples of this, it might be that it's physically easier to get to. So things like roadside patches may be a good spot to start because they're relatively easy to treat and very easy to spot. As well, these are very important vectors for potential spread, along those roadsides. If there may be other instances where maybe you have a different skill set or you have access to different tools, and that would make, say, coastal work easier than roadside. But really, you're going to do what you can and identify those next steps for the process. Being able to get mobile and plan out how to map and control in remote and large areas is really important in large landscape settings. So looking at areas like, say, Northern Ontario roadsides, you may have a larger area that you're looking to treat or a larger area that you're trying to map out. Being able to effectively prioritize areas that you identify first. Maybe that's the main highways that are targeted, followed by secondary and tertiary roads, based on the amount of travel. As well, it's good to identify what your priorities are ahead of your implementation work. So, are you a municipality that's interested in, say, infrastructure, or is it health and safety along the roadsides from, say, fire or visual line of sight for traffic? Are you concerned about the natural capital values or the ecological, I guess, integrity of the site? Or, is it property value driven? What are really those main priorities that you have, and build out from there? And lastly, it's really prioritizing what you can do with the skills that you have. So working within your working group, you do have a diverse set of skills. Some things take some time to build up. Maybe it's getting folks with appropriate experience or licensing to do certain aspects of the work. Work with what you've got and plan on how you're going to build out with the program from there. So once we've kind of gone through that prioritization step, there's likely going to be some permits and authorizations that you'll need to consider. So similar to other management and maintenance activity landscape, there may be authorizations that are required to deliver your Phragmites management program. So this criteria is really, there's a couple of documents that will give you a good overview of the regulatory criteria that you may end up encountering. So within the guidebook itself, there's actually, I'll step back for a second here. So for example, just to give an example of what this might look like, if herbicides are required for the work that you're doing, at least a licensed exterminator with the correct category of license is needed under the Pesticides Act here in Ontario in order to undertake the application of the work. When working in areas, say, like species at risk habitat, there are additional guidance and authorizations that need to be considered under the Endangered Species Act here in the province and federally through the Species at Risk Act. And so these may be necessary. So within the guidebook, as well as within the best management practices guide that the OIPC have on their website, we've outlined some tables with the information regarding permits and authorizations that you might come across for different types of control on the landscape. So, as we've probably said a few times, and as you know, every frag patch is different. Every site has its own unique challenges and opportunities. And there might be different requirements based on the type of conditions that you have locally. The physical location of the site access may be difficult, or it may change, what species are present, what methods that you're using, different timing for the work needs to all be considered. And the permits and approvals are really needed within these sites to be able to scope out that work. And it's likely that the permits and approvals will vary from site to site. So we'll hear a little bit later today from Tom Cowan, who's a pesticide specialist at the MECP, so Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, who oversees the permitting and authorization for chemical treatment here in the province. And he's going to go over some of the considerations for provincial requirements. So with all the talk of permits and authorizations, these tools do provide a good overview of things to consider. But keep in mind, the guidebook only provides helpful advice to navigate the process. It's not prescriptive to any specific projects, and it's always best to connect with your regional contact from the regulating agencies prior to implementing a project. And this is really necessary to ensure that the permits and authorizations are properly in place and are being considered for the work that you're doing. As well, a really good point of advice too, this can be a lengthy process at times. And so really identifying which permits you need and authorizations and doing this starting the process as early as possible is really the best step forward in order to deliver, to get these in place. And so, as we're building up to with, we'd love to see more landscape scale frag control on the landscape, keeping in mind, the more work that's happening too, the more permit applications and approvals that may need to go through the regulatory side. So, it's working nicely and providing good lead time for that work to take place. So with reporting and permits and authorizations, there's almost always some form of reporting that's going to come along with it. And so, the requirements for reporting may be very site and permit specific. So, making sure that you have a careful review of the documents and the approvals that you have in advance of getting out in the field. So is really important. So making sure that the necessary data that needs to be collected is not overlooked, as well as certain timelines and check-ins and certain aspects of the work are delivered as outlined on the permits and authorizations. So often, these mandatory reports do require data, and that is something that's already being collected. Really for our, for other reporting that we may have for future seasons. And it could be, it's informing those future seasons or requirements for funding or partner organization reporting. So once we've got those permits in place, we've got our prioritized approach of how we're going to deal with things. And, we're working with our working group, kind of delivering this on the landscape. We've done all this legwork to identify where we're going to be, let's implement it. So we're going to hear a little bit later from Brett Norman at Nature Conservancy Canada. And so Brett's a colleague of mine that has been leading the Long Point Phragmites landscape scale work the last, I believe, 6 years. And he'll give a good overview of implementation. But again, since every Phragmites patch is different, it has different site conditions, different infestation size, the patch size or thickness or density might be different. The access may be difficult to get into the site. There's environmental considerations maybe with those sites as well in terms of in-water timing windows or protections for species at risk. It's best to identify really these approaches prior to implementing your program. There are several tools that are available, including the BMP that I mentioned earlier, and other resource guides that can help with implementation and identifying what is the right tool for the job. And not only that, there's also the right personnel for the job, and also other considerations for your timing and things like that. So in the guidebook as well, we're not going to get into detail about this, but there is an additional section that provides tips for specific types of specific land types. I've got a slide at the end that'll discuss these. So we won't go into much more detail about this, but it can be helpful in scoping out your approach if you're working in different landscapes. So for example, utility corridors versus environmentally sensitive habitats. So with implementation, some of the main components that we're going to talk about. First, we're going to go forward. Here we go. When it comes to staffing up for a Phragmites program, staffing up is really a major component of this work. So being sure that we're using the right type of person for the right type of job. Typically, these fall into three core categories, and these can include experienced and qualified staff, as well volunteers and contractors. So chances are you're going to have maybe a mix of these over the years if you have a multi-year program. Often we see a lot of volunteers that are helping with some of the smaller programs that are on the go. Experienced and qualified staff are usually hired on if it's a multi-year program, and a strong focus on delivering this. It's not an edge of the table job for somebody. And then lastly, contractors as well that provide a lot of benefit to the overall program. So with respect to experienced and qualified staff, it is vital to have someone overseeing the work year after year. And having staff that are dedicated to the program can really provide continuity of program implementation, knowledge of lessons learned, and there's a lot you can learn over one small season. If you have someone who's been on the team for a while, they've seen probably like Janice, for example, has probably seen it all out there, and it's great to have folks that have that continued dedication to the program. As well, while you do have dedicated staff, if you do have those leaders that are taking on the coordination and delivery, if you're able to have other qualified staff or junior staff positions or seasonal opportunities, this can really help grow your team in the long run, as well as collectively frag and invasive species management in the province itself. But having those junior staff can really help them lead to develop a leading role through that gained experience, and maybe are leading their own program at another point. Looking at volunteer strength, they bring so much to the table. There's a lot of value in having your volunteers out there. It really, if it's having extra hands on site with difficult or labor-intensive projects, or even just having that public focus on the work can be very, very beneficial to the work that you're doing. So in kind, this really provides opportunities for us to engage volunteers, when we're doing this work, and embolden them to become champions and advocates for this type of work in their personal circles. As well, the great thing, even with working groups too, everyone brings a different perspective, a different approach, and different opportunities and creativity to the work. So, there's often we get into our own siloed fields, and having someone from an outside perspective who's maybe not solely thinking about frag day in, day out, may come up with some interesting ideas and help reinvigorate some of that work. And then lastly, we do have contracts that are extremely effective. And really, when it comes to landscape scale Phragmites treatment on the landscape, they can be very cost efficient, very effective to deliver the work. There are lots of great contractors that do perform Phragmites management on the landscape. And, with that said, there is limitation. We do have lots that are doing great work, but there's always a need for more, and having a need for more contractors that have this specialized experience, and especially when it comes to working in environmentally sensitive habitats is very crucial. And so really, to be truly effective, we want to be sure to identify the contractors that we're using have the experience and the capability to do the work. Perhaps, it's good to have qualified staff on board with a good track record. Perhaps they have some good examples of projects or references to previous clients that they can bring to the table. And really, if they're able to work in a wide range of areas and habitats, including sensitive habitats, they have experience or a wide range of equipment that can be used. This is really vital. And lastly, thinking from a permit and authorization perspective, these are very complicated at times, especially if you're new to the system or new to preparing these documents. And having contractors with some sound understanding of this aspect of the work is really helpful for that implementation as well. So, always good to find great staff across, if they're paid or volunteers or if they're contracted. So next up, for implementation, we'll talk about seasonality. I apologize, I'm having to scroll with my mouse to get from each. So we've heard this before, and Vicky shared a slide yesterday of timing windows to deliver frag management. So there's certain times of the year, that are kind of blacked out, or where we're not doing any work around in-water works for protection of species at risk, herptiles, fish, different species, or it might be around nesting times under Migratory Bird Act as well. So targeting Phragmites at the appropriate time is really important, but it can be somewhat difficult. And so implementing this is really based on good planning. And so part of that is just knowing the life history of the plant, when it's hitting its certain stages of growth, when it starts seeding, when it starts to die back. And then from there, keeping a keen eye to the skies so that you're able to pay close attention to those weather patterns and conditions so that you can see opportunities. A lot of this work that we're doing happens in a very small timeline, and it gets much smaller when you have there's time sensitive windows to work, and weather can definitely play a factor in delivering this work, this environmental work. It always does. And so working within those constructs as best you can is really effective, and being able to effectively time your treatment techniques so that you're ready to employ when you get the boots on the ground, when you're ready to go. So there are as I mentioned, biological considerations around species at risk, as well in-water works and environmentally sensitive windows. And these should all be considered within your planning. We make comment to these within the BMP and within this guidebook as well. But it's often the case that the permits and authorizations that you've already acquired will also have those timelines in place for seasonal implementation to help structure your timing windows. So with that in mind, other things as mentioned before, site accessibility and timing for access can really change from site to site. Some cases you may think that it's going to be relatively easy to get into, but finding that actual entrance point, say for larger equipment, may be difficult. And sometimes this takes a little bit of planning ahead of time and discussion with other landowners. For example, like having an access, there may be some situations where you need to develop an access plan and a map to show maybe landowners where you're coming in, how you're going to access the site, and how you're going to leave, and build this into your implementation planning. There's other things as well that may influence the work, and it's really those local on-site conditions, changing weather conditions from year to year, those timing windows I mentioned, as well as other things like facilitating opportunities for recreation and hunting access. So just speaking from some of the experiences I had last year with the Norfolk and Long Point program and working with Brett with this, we did have to work with local hunt clubs that we were treating and treating frag for in order to limit time that would be impacting folks that are actively out hunting. So working as best we can with them, other research that was going on as well. So there was some work happening on the federal lands where basically they wanted, for research purposes, certain areas not to be managed at certain times. And so, there are those other considerations when it comes to implementing the project. And then lastly, we'll talk about the fun bits. So equipment, using the appropriate equipment, for the project is really important. And, making sure that you're using it with caution, with respect and safety, people and the environment in mind. Equipment, both big and small, should be well maintained, should be stored safely and securely, and it needs to really, the equipment, the needs for the different equipment will vary depending on the accessibility of the site, the habitat, the patch size. Again, it's always this big mixture. We put all of the different tools into the toolbox, and which ones are we going to take out in the field? And it's really based on all of those local conditions and the timing and everything. As well, be sure when you're using equipment to follow clean equipment protocols. There is a clean equipment protocol document up on the OIPC on their website. As well, within this document that we have, this guidebook, there is some language that's been put together to help help folks with writing that into contracts if you're hiring a contractor as well, for example. I'll talk a little bit about that. But this is really, the guidebook does provide a nice set of tables of what different equipment to consider for use in different areas. As well, it's a helpful resource for, another helpful resource for this is the Frag BMP. And so really it kind of helps with, depending on the size of the patch, the location, if it's wet, if it's dry, it provides kind of the pros and cons, like, best case scenario, what equipment you would use, as well as some of the pros and cons, I believe, is in the guidebook as well of the different types of equipment that's out there. And it's really important as well to connect with folks in your working group, and they may be using different contractors, or they may be using different equipment than you. It may just be a different brand of equipment, and it may make all the difference in terms of delivering your program. Some of the equipment you learn in the field how finicky certain things can be, and really learn from their experiences and share information as best as possible. So we did break it down. There's three main kind of overarching components that we're talking about when it comes to equipment. There's vehicle. This may be either to access, or it might be for delivering program. So things like boom trucks are great. Roadside pickup trucks are also good. in terms of moving around, and you can have your all your tools right there: ATVs, UTVs, amphibious off-road vehicles. So like our Marshmaster here with NCC, there's other ones like the truck soars or fat trucks as well, and even boats in some cases for those more wet sites. Things like manual equipment, such as backpack sprayers, cane cutters, sickles, and spades are also covered off in the guidebook with some of those pros and cons. And some of the general items too, just some things to keep in mind when you're implementing your program are pumps and filters, the type of GPS tracking system that you may be using or likely using, safety and communications equipment, and things like proper clothing and PPE, personal protective equipment for your staff. So now that we've implemented the project, let's talk a little bit about monitoring and reporting. And I realize as I say this, monitoring really should be planned out before we're implementing the project as well, so that we can get that baseline information where possible. But, as mentioned previously, where the permits and authorizations are obtained, there will likely be reporting that takes place as well. So when we keep this in mind, really a monitoring plan is a vital component to delivering a Phragmites program. And dedicated monitoring can really help us tell the story of how your hard work has really come together. So, it's not only where we started, but look at where we're at. It can really inform your overall multi-year management plan. It can be used as a funding tool as well for future program years. And, establishing and using a tracking system from the early get-go. Maybe it's something like a daily form that you're keeping, an ArcGIS field maps program, ArcMap database applications, or say EdMaps or iNaturalist. These or other electronic methods. These can all really be helpful to help you meet the needs of all the reporting, as well as any of the future management considerations. As well, developing the monitoring plan from the outset can help standardize your results and make your reporting a breeze. There have been, it's not always as clean as you'd hope, but it may take a little bit of tweaking. But reaching out to folks in that working group and reaching out to your colleagues that are doing similar work, finding a good starting point through that is really helpful. And so I actually shared the image here. This map is actually from some of the monitoring and tracking that we did while doing treatment in the Lambton Shores area with the Lambton Shores Community Group, as well as the Osable Bay Field Conservation Authority. And so these maps were actually made from tracking systems that we have, both flow meters for some of our chemical treatment work, as well as GPS tracking of our Marshmaster and boat and other equipment to show track lines and treatment areas. And I mentioned it in the last slide, but really considering the use of GPS-based tracking software for many activities during the treatment is really important. Many of the tablets, phones, and handheld GPSs that are now available are pretty inexpensive, and they do offer the ability to take points and track lines that allow you to follow machinery. And this might be individual, either machinery, or if it's on a person who's doing some traveling around with the unit on their person. It really does help with tracking for that progress and making maps of treatment areas and calculating hectares treated. You can also use these electronic mapping devices to upload some of your pre-treatment mapping to really help navigate when you're out on the landscape. So kind of the picture here, this is just a cropped photo from a screenshot from the Avenza app, which is one that we use at NCC. And it's showing basically what we were able to do is upload the map onto the Avenza app on the tablet. It uses our GPS within the unit to identify where we are. I think we do have a GPS booster to help to make sure it's a very accurate location. But really, as our operators are out in the field with the Marshmaster, they're looking through that tall frag, trying to see where they're at. They're able to identify and locate themselves within those greater patches as well, using this tracking software. So when it comes to what to collect, really at a minimum, focus on your basic data. So what is really essential to to your program, to your delivery, subsequent seasons of the program. It's really helpful with identifying populations of frag, individuals that may have been missed in previous years, or areas that are regrowing, secondary invasions of other non-native plants as well, and really allows you to kind of map and move through, even identifying and marking out established native plants that we need to avoid, or species at risk areas. This data, as mentioned, can be used to determine the next control measures. So the next year, basically it's giving us a report of where we've been, what we've done, but also will inform, what those next steps are as we prioritize our efforts moving forward. And again, sharing lessons with other fraggers is always super helpful, and it supports the ongoing efficiencies and success of frag management. And so, and helps improve our mapping techniques. So as we're kind of moving along too, hopefully we're starting to see, we are starting to see some of these mapping techniques become much more user-friendly as well as available on the landscape. So lastly, just when it comes to the content of, that first part of the guidebook, we do have some tips and tips for tracking and reporting. So as I've mentioned several times, monitoring and reporting obviously go hand in hand. And often we can get a little lost in the weeds when we're determining what information to be collecting and what data while we're out in the field. And, it's good to kind of a priori, just, have some ideas of what you're going to collect ahead of time. And these are things that, may be either of interest, for the authorizations and permits that you have to report on, or it might be, key performance indicators that are needed for a funding or grant application, or, from those other external partners if you're sharing some of that information as well. So just in general, there are a few good examples. Always great to take pictures before and after. And often this is something that once you're, deep in the weeds with the program, it's hard to, there's typically lots of photos of, those dense sites when you're in them. Being able to get those before and after are really great. New things like, drone imagery is really come a long way in terms of personal, very cheap drones in terms of being able to get those landscape scale shots. They really do help tell the story. I've been gabbing at you for about 40 minutes, and I could have probably just shared 5 or 6 slides showing before and after of projects, and that's likely going to pay dividends and really help out. As well, measure the distance in the area that you're managing. So it could be hectares, it could be kilometers of shoreline. So, hectares being area, kilometers of shoreline, it does kind of, there's area involved there, but it's more of that line information as well. These are really easily captured on a lot of different devices these days as well. Personnel and equipment, something to consider as well when you're collecting that information for KPIs. The number of people that are formally trained, the people that are trained in frag management using these different techniques, types of performance, type and performance of the equipment that you used, excuse me, as well as treatment and landowner site information. And so, working, not only is it great to have it for your tracking and your reporting and your your KPIs, but tracking that so that you can revisit, reconnect with different landowners and keep a track of how things are going on the different sites. certain things like communications and outreach, keeping an eye on the type and the number of promotional materials that were produced, number of media releases or prints, social media metrics. If you're holding workshops, the number of people that have attended. Thank you, everyone that became a statistic for today's number of attendees at the workshop. Really appreciate it. It's going to go right into our KPIs. As well, certain anecdotes are really helpful too. So interesting or rare species that you've identified. As well, different important feedback that you get from the communities and those lessons learned from implementing the work. So at this point, we do find ourselves at the end of the process of program delivery and at the end of this section of the guidebook. With reporting completed for the year, we're starting to turn our eyes to the next season. And, all this reporting really comes in handy at this point. Not only does it provide information of what was accomplished, it also sets the stage for what to implement the next year, as well as the planning for future years. So this collected information can really help to build out your budgets for future implementation, develop and prioritize your plans based on the results that you had, the areas that you want to hit next, identify what funders or what contributors to the work that you might have in the next year, based on that, the reporting as well as the information just collecting on the landscape throughout the duration of the project. And, lessons learned throughout this journey, they really do inform your future work and can help you find efficiencies in the work and your working group as well. And so with that in mind, we've really come to the natural end of what I was planning to cover. Whew, made it. But I'm going to cover a couple more quick sections. And I just really wanted to mention the additional resources that we have in the guidebook. So part 2 of this guidebook, it does provide tips for specific land types. So a little bit more information about the process of doing work on roads, along utility corridors, natural areas, urban and public lands, and private lands. So it just gives a little bit more information. Again, it's not completely prescriptive, but it does provide more value in that sense. And excuse me, lastly, there's also another section at the very end, the part 3, which are example templates. So what this does is this provides some of the more tricky components when it comes to the need for specific language. So included in this, there's an application for a letter of opinion template, a public notice of pesticide use, an alternate pesticide use notification template, as well as I mentioned the clean equipment protocol that the OIPC has on their website. We've got a bit of language that's put together in that section there, really to help inform or kind of cut and paste into a fee-for-service contract. So if we're hiring a contractor to do frag work, we want to ensure that their equipment is clean when it's coming to the site and it's clean when it's leaving or prior to going to a new location, so that we're not facilitating spread through the efforts that we're doing. So with that, be sure to check out these sections. Again, there's lots of great resources that the OIPC has put together. This webinar guidebook, this guidebook itself, it's great. And other information we have on the Green Shovels website. So there is a cost-benefit analysis for work in municipal areas. There is a strategic framework of delivering on a landscape scale. And, there's other resources that come and go as well. And, well, I guess at this point, you're probably sick of hearing me jaw away. So next we'll hear from Tom Cowan, and I'm going to pass this back over to Vicki. Possibly.
Hi, good. Everything good? So, go. Hi, Tom. Just give me 1 minute. I want to introduce Tom Cowan. So Tom Cowan is from the MECP, and he will be presenting on permits and authorizations. So you can just share your screen.
There we go. Now can you see it?
Yeah, I see your full screen.
Perfect. Yeah, just let me know when you want me to go.
You're ready. Can get started.
I can get started anytime. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a couple of years since I've talked on pesticide permits, and I think it was 2022 the last time we looked at this. So I think it's a good time to kind of revisit it. We've had a few applications come in over the last couple of years, and yeah, some of them could use some work. So I think it's a really good time now to kind of readdress that. So I'm just going to quickly go over a few things regarding permits. I want to just touch on the number of Phragmites permits we have had since 2021, and then I'll look into why a permit is needed. We'll talk about licensing requirements, go over some exemptions for permits and licenses, some that might apply to you, some that might not. Then we'll move into the nitty-gritty of how to fill out a permit application form, the additional documents you'll need when you're applying for your permit, and how to submit the permit. I'll talk over a little bit about the review process and then what to do when you receive your permit, and just touch on a little bit of the other legislation that might be involved as well. So moving on, in 2021, we actually did issue a permit. I found this in our system. It was actually issued out of our Central Region Toronto office. And it was for just a small amount. I think this was like a pond. And I'm not sure if it was actually treated or not, but that does come up in our system. And 2022 was the year we really started with the permits. We had 35 permits issued and about 143 hectares that were permitted to be treated. That doesn't mean they were treated. Oftentimes we give a permit for more area than is actually treated in the time, given, I don't know, there's like timing windows and things that don't quite make it, or people don't get to all the locations. But we did permit 143 hectares. Then in 2023, so it was last year, we had 48 permits. The numbers are going up, and 458 approved hectares treated. So we don't know exactly, again, how many of those hectares were treated. But again, that's a pretty big raise. And this year, don't know. We're expecting, again, at least the same as 2023, maybe even more. But while I have this slide up, I just want to say, if you're applying for permits, get your permit in as early as possible. If you submit to us in September or October, that's getting a bit late, and we're pretty bogged down with a bunch of other work from the summer. Okay, so if you give it to us then, you got a coin flip of getting your permit in time. Okay, if you get it in early, that gives us a lot of time to work through it. And do site visits if we need to, and get all that information done. So you'll get your permit on time if you submit early. Submit late, maybe. Okay, so just gonna quickly go over a bit why a permit is needed. The main thing is, well, two reasons. One, it's a legislative requirement. So in Ontario, the Pesticide Act and Regulation 6309 requires that you apply for a permit and have one when you're applying aquatic herbicides for an aquatic extermination. Okay. There's no cost associated with these permits, so they're free of charge. You just apply to us and we provide you with the permit, so long as information is all there. They also help us out a little bit with environmental protection, so it's like a second set of eyes, right? Another person going through and having a look. It just prevents arbitrary use of pesticides, so we want to limit what we're using to areas where it's going to be effective, right? So it's limiting treatment areas. It helps us control invasive species. So it lets us know where those species are and what we're doing about them, so we can actually track that. So we got some kind of tracking system involved to let us know where we're doing, where the pesticide is going, and what's being applied. We're hoping it reduces environmental impacts. So upon our review, we'll look at that to determine whether or not we're seeing impacts of the pesticide over time. If we see a location where we suggest it should not be done and other methods can be used, then we can say no pesticide here, do something else here. It also ensures proper public notification of treatments. And this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue as the years go on. I imagine some of you have encountered this when you're doing public notification for treatments. You'll see people who are either concerned or object. This allows us to have a look at the permit, where you're going, what you're treating, and making sure that people are involved in that process of notification. Okay, we also look to see if you're doing a permit application that you have the right license for it, and that license for treating aquatic vegetation is the aquatic vegetation license. This license gives you the authority to use registered aquatic herbicides for water exterminations, right? So we assume that once the person has a license, they have had training from the extermination manual. They're certified by the Ontario Pesticide Training and Certification Center. Okay, that's a self-studied course with a written test. You require 75% to pass. Okay, if you're successful, you get a certificate from them, and then you apply for your license from us based on that certification. So that means that if you have that license, I know you've read the books, you've done the work. So you should be aware of all the requirements that are needed to apply aquatic herbicides in Ontario. Okay, now the drawback to that licensing program is this: there's no practical exam. Okay, so it's only theoretical. So you can go through the whole thing and have never touched a pesticide before. If you're new to this, if you're looking at getting into the Phragmites management game, then I really strongly suggest you talk to someone who's done the work and get some practical training from them so that you know how to actually go about and apply the pesticides in the way that's going to be effective and safe. Okay. If you're running a pest control business, an operator's license is also required. So if you are hiring someone to do the work, so if you're looking at a larger program and you want to subdivide it off and get some subcontractors in, make sure that person who you're subcontracting to has an operator's license. Okay, it just makes life so much easier in the end. So that person will have an operator's license. They'll know what they should be doing. They'll know that licensed people are needed, and it will make the process go so much easier, especially if you get inspected. Okay, so there's a few exemptions from licenses and permits that I want to go over. The first one is an exemption to a license. This one we don't typically see a lot of. This is kind of an older holdover from previous iterations of the legislation, but it's still in there. So it says the person who performs the extermination, if they're the owner or the occupier of the premises or the full-time employee of that person, they do not require an exterminator's license to conduct a water extermination so long as that extermination is being done within the boundaries of their own property. Now, this doesn't mean you're exempt from a permit. It just means for that extermination, you're exempt from a license. Okay, you rarely ever find this happening. This happens sometimes for marina applications where the owner actually owns the water lot. Okay, most don't. They just use either rented land or it's crown land. But in the rare cases that happens, yes, they can. Typically, this happens on properties that have ponds. So a wholly contained pond on someone's property, the person does not need a license to apply herbicides to that pond. That is the case whether the pond has an outflow or not. There's other exemptions that would apply to the permit if the pond has an outflow or not. Okay, permit exemptions apply. So you can be exempt from a permit if you're applying to a drainage ditch. Now I've added this section in because it was missed in the last iteration of this presentation. And this might have some utility for those doing very large areas of drainage ditch work. So if it's a drainage ditch, you use a class B, C, or D. So that's a restricted class pesticide, a commercial class pesticide, or a domestic class pesticide, where the label permits you to use it for that extermination. You do not require a permit if you're controlling plants that float on or emerge from the surface of the water. Okay, and also if there's no moving water in the ditch at the time. Okay, so again, they have to be plants that are floating on the surface or emerging from it, and there's no moving water. So next you're going to ask, Tom, what's a drainage ditch? Well, lucky for you, I have the answer. This is actually from the legislation. So we actually went and defined it in the legislation. It says a drainage ditch. This means an artificial water course added to the natural land drainage system, primarily to collect and convey water that, for some period each year, does not contain moving water. Okay, so it's not a natural freshet or a stream or cold water stream. It is something that's actually constructed. Okay, so this is like roadside ditches. This will be like drainage systems that are dug through farmland or something like that. Those are considered to be drainage ditches. Okay, so the permit, you are exempt from a permit if you're applying to Phragmites, for example, that's growing out of the water, and at the time you're applying it, there's no moving water in that ditch. The water is just basically stagnant. Okay, if there's water in that ditch all times over the year, it's not a drainage ditch. Okay, it has to actually go dry at some point. So this might be a bit of an issue, say in the Chatham-Kent area, where you've got a lot of drainage systems kind of going along down there. Some are constructed, some are streams. So it's going to be a little tricky to kind of navigate that. And if you're having trouble navigating what is considered a ditch and what's not a ditch, just give your regional specialist a call. We can give you a hand with that. Okay, so permit exemption also applies if you're applying to a completely contained pond that's no inflow, no outflow at any point during the year, and it's located totally within the property boundaries of your own property or a property. Okay, so totally within the property bounds, doesn't have any inflow or outflow at any point in the year. Okay, you're exempt from both a license and a permit for that work. You would have to apply to the director under the Act for a letter confirming you're exempt, because if you don't have a license, you don't require a permit, you can't buy the product. And you're hired to do that work, you will require a permit for that. The exemption doesn't apply. In every other case, if you're applying pesticides to water, a permit is needed. So basically by default, there's only a few situations where a permit is not needed. In the majority of cases, I would say like 95%, you would need a permit from us. Now, that was a good segue. How to get a permit, how to apply for it. So a complete permit package includes the following stuff. We need that completed application form, and it's got to be signed by the exterminator who's doing the work, or not necessarily the exterminator doing the work, but by a licensed exterminator who's maybe designing the program, right? We want to see the exterminator sign it just because that person has really detailed knowledge of what's going on, how pesticides work, and the requirements of their license and what they're allowed to do, right? So we want that person to be involved in it somehow. We want proof of water lot ownership and a letter of permission from the water lot owner, or proof that the water lot is Crown land. Okay, so we need the person who owns the land or manages the land to give us a letter saying that you have been hired to do the work on their property. This is due to the old days back pre-2003 where we would get people applying for multiple people applying for permits for the same property and then trying to sell their services saying they have a permit already for the job. This ended up having multiple permits being issued for the same property, so there's all kinds of issues with that as well. Now we want to make sure that the person who's doing the work is hired by the person who's asking for the work being done. We want a location map showing where the site's located, and that is in relation to larger cities and towns and major roads, and a detailed site map of the application area. Now I'm going to go into a little more detail of what these are. So when you're filling out the application form, and this is important, we need as much accurate information as you can get, okay? Because this is the legal document that's going to be attached to our files that says you've applied for the permit. So we need you to provide all your identification information, so all that tombstone data like your name, telephone number, business number, etc. We want you to identify the target pest. In this case, it's Phragmites. Don't say aquatic plants. That's kind of nebulous. We want to know what you're applying and where you're applying it. We're matching this information up with the label. Okay, so we want to make sure that all this stuff matches what the label says you can do. So we want you to include the name of the pesticide number, the PCP number, the active ingredient, all that good stuff. The type of application. So water applications are ground applications if you're standing on the ground and spraying. Okay, so you're in a boat, spraying is a ground application. If you're flying an aircraft and you're using sort of aerial application, that's an aerial application. Want to know the application rate, and that's found on the product label. In some cases, right, there's ranges of application rates, so pick the application rate that's right for your location. Your quantity is going to be based on the size of the area in hectares and the application rate or amount of pesticide you're going to use. Okay. If you've had a previous application for the site and you're applying for maybe like a second application to kind of treat Phragmites escapes from previous years, it's always a really good idea to get that last permit number and put it in there. It just saves us a lot of time when we're going through. We don't have to kind of look up your old stuff and try and pull it through our system. Our system was designed in 2003. It's a little old, and it was out of date when it was made in 2003. So, I mean, 21 years later, it's not the easiest thing to work with. Okay, so the second page of the application, I'm going to ask you to do the few things here. We want the length, width, and depth of the treatment area. Now, here's the thing. If there's multiple treatment areas that you're going to be using, you can include a list. So in that area, you just write see attached list, and then you'll give me a list of the various treatment areas and their sizes. It can be length, width, and depth. We don't really need too much depth for Phragmites, but it's good to have on there, or total area. So each area, how many hectares you'll be treating. Okay, you'll include the name of the property owner, the name of the water body, if it has a name, and sometimes they don't, right? So it's just like a pond or a wetland. If the wetland's got a name, put it in. If it doesn't, just give a description, a wetland on Highway 57, something like that. And provide the property address. If there's no property address, just write, see attached maps, and then we can just go with the maps that you provide. Okay, so there's also a list of activities associated with the water body. For a lot of the stuff in like marshes and stuff, there won't really be too much, but sometimes sometimes there's swimming going on in the area or crop irrigation or something like that. So go and check off all those water uses that you know of. Now, moving on to the objectors. So prior to applying for the permit, we want you to go out and talk to the neighboring properties. If it's a small location, a single application in a single area, and they have like 2 neighbors, you can just talk to those 2 neighbors. It'll just the adjacent people to the application area is all you need. Now, if you're doing a larger area, say you're like up in Oliphant where they're doing the fishing islands, a lot of people use that area. There's beachfront, there's boating, there's fishing, there's all kinds of stuff going on. That's going to require a larger outreach project to notify people and obtain objectors. Okay, so it's really going to depend on the size of your treatment and what you're doing. For this, if you need help, just give your pesticide specialist a call. We will help you, kind of walk you through what we'd like to see in terms of that. Okay, the final part of the form is the exterminator name and the operator name. So the exterminator who's doing the work, the operator who is doing the work, so the operator name. Don't forget to sign the application form. So the exterminator must sign this form, and they have to date it. And if it's not signed and dated, we can't process it because this form is your legal application form that we will attach to the permit file. And this is kind of what we're going with. Okay, we'll take digital signatures, that's fine too. But either a hand signed or digital signature, that's fine. Okay, so once you've got your form filled out and it's looking really good, here's a few other things that we'll need. That permission letter from the water lot owner. Okay, we'll need that. It could be something simple like John Smith, give my permission for Phragmites of Ontario to apply on my land. Something that simple, right? It can also be an email so long as it's sent directly to me from the person in charge of the land. You have to determine if that water lot is Crown land or if it's owned by another entity or if it's owned by the federal government. So for example, you've got like the Trent Severn Waterway, that's federal waterway, so different rules apply to that. So you'd have to contact them and find out what the rules are in terms of their application. You will still need a permit from us to do that work. If it's Crown land and you can identify it as Crown land, then when you apply to us for the permit, your permit is your permission to apply on that land. So when you get a permit from MECP, that is your permission for Crown land applications, unless there's something different going on. So for example, very few cases, I've come across maybe 2 in my entire career where the Crown land is being rented and there are requirements for rental. So that would mean the permission from MNRF will be required before any work is done, including herbicide application. In that case, you would need permission from the MNRF prior to going ahead with the permit. But like I said, that's very rarely do I see that. Okay, if multiple properties are included in the application, then you're going to need permission from each of the people who have a property on there. So I think there was in the previous presentation, there's talk of like doing roadsides, and then there was like some private properties associated with that still had Phragmites on that. You would need the permission from those landowners signed to apply on their land. Okay, and that would be electronic maps. And to be honest, there is so many options available right now. There's no excuse not to give me really good maps, okay? So we want two types of maps, a quick location map, and this shows the location of the treatment sites for, like, major cities and towns and roadways. It's just an idea of where in the province the extermination is being done. Okay, that's usually pretty simple, but when it comes down to the site maps, we typically have problems with this, right? I want them to be as detailed as possible. Running into a few problems with that simply because people just put a map and a dot on the map and say I'm applying here. Okay, well, that's not good enough. In the old days, so we would go out and look at it, and I would have a very good idea of what you're doing on that site and where the pesticide is going. So a map that doesn't quite meet the requirements wouldn't be a huge problem because I'm really familiar with the site. The problem is if a spill happens or a complaint happens, and an environmental officer has to go through that information, they won't have that same kind of knowledge. They'll just be looking at it and have no idea what they're looking at. Because of that, we've been asked to ensure that the maps that are being given to us are very descriptive. Okay, so we want to know the location of the application area in relation to neighboring properties. So I want to see property boundary lines. So if you're looking at getting a map with property boundary lines, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has a heritage map. You can make a map there and it gives you the property boundaries and the assessment parcels. It's really good. I really recommend you look at that. You can also draw polygons and take measurements. It's pretty decent. You need to point out to us the location of public access points or areas where the public are use. So this is like boat launches, docks and boat slips, properties, neighboring boundaries, swimming areas, that sort of stuff. Like all that stuff's really important for us to see on that map. We might not be aware of some of the things that are there unless a site visit's done. Okay, and this happens in a lot of cases. We'll go out there and we'll find all kinds of people using the water that we didn't know was happening. It wasn't provided to us in the permit application. We want to see the location of the treatment areas. You can use length, width, or you can just put the area on the map. So you can just have a polygon that says, like, 0.2 hectares. Please use metric. I don't like converting from imperial units. It kind of annoys me. I'm a child of the new math. Okay, locate any identified sensitive receptors. So these are areas like fish sanctuaries, sensitive tree species, species at risk stuff. You can put that all on the map. We really want to see that. Areas of water intakes, those sorts of things are really important to put on the map. We also want to know if you're applying to a stream and it's slow flowing, what are the downstream water uses? Like what's going on? Are there water intakes near your application area? Are they potable water intakes or non-potable? Those are the kind of things we want to see on the map. When we do our review, we will look for water permits, but our water taking permits only go so far. So if they're taking less than 50,000 liters a day, there's no permit required for that. We won't even know. Okay, so it's only the larger water takings that we'll have access to. We rely on those who are doing the work to kind of go through and look and find those small intakes. I want to see something like this. Okay, so you're going to be applying to these areas here. You've outlined them for me. Okay, you've given me the area of them. You could even give me the length and the width. I prefer to see the hectare area. You show me there's a campground over here and a water intake and distances from the treatment areas to the water intake. Okay, I've got a public trail here with access to the water. That's good to see. I got some sensitive trees over here. Those are things I want to see, right? So now I can go and give a better review of the permit knowing all this information here. This is also going to help me when I'm saying, okay, what do we want to do for notification? Okay, well, I want notification on the public trails. Over here, I want you to contact the people who are using the duck blind to see when they're applying, right? So all those little things I want to see, and I want to make sure that when we're doing notifications that come with your permit requirements, that these people all get proper notification of where the pesticide is being applied and when. Okay, so to submit your application, make sure your package is complete. We like electronic submissions and we like them by email. So on the slide here, I've got a list of the regional offices and where your regional office will be based on what municipality you're in. So just for note, the telephone numbers that are provided are for the regional contact office. So It's not the specialist in particular, but you will get like the duty officer, and they will be able to point you towards the person who is in charge of the pesticides for your area. If you already know your specialist, great. You can just send them an email and we'll be happy to process it. If you know the name of the person but don't know their number, you can look at our employee site, InfoGo, type in their name, and you can find their phone number there. And one of the reasons why we don't put the specialist phone numbers in here anymore is because these presentations kind of live for a while and numbers change and people leave the role, and we just want to make sure that you're getting pointed to the right person. So when we're reviewing the permits applications when they come in, we're going to check it for completeness. I've got an old friend who's a farmer, and he says to me constantly, do it right or do it again, right? So if it's not done right, we're going to ask you to resubmit it and do it again. So just make sure you've got all the I's dotted, T's crossed, permit application forms signed, okay? We'll request any missing documentation. If it's substantially incomplete or substantially inaccurate, then we're going to tell you to redo the whole thing. But for the most part, when we're asking for things, we'll just ask for small things piecemeal, because in many situations we're reviewing these and every site's different. So we're just going to ask for small updates on certain things for the most part. For the most part, people do a good job of it. Typically, if your maps aren't what we want, we will ask you to redo the maps. So just please make sure your maps are correct. We'll confirm the rate and the amount of pesticide that you're using. We'll make sure that there's a licensed exterminator applying the pesticide. And we'll make sure what you're proposing meets the label requirements. So if you're proposing to spray a certain pesticide for a certain pest over a certain area and a certain location, we'll make sure that that meets the label requirements. We're going to look at that for potential environmental impact. So for example, we will look to see where the water takings are. We'll look to see where any source water protection intake zones are, if that's going to be a problem there. We'll look at all that stuff as part of the permit review process. We may ask you for modifications. If we happen to see things that might not work based on what you're giving us, we'll ask you to look at your application techniques again and just maybe modify your process a little bit. Okay, when you get your permit, okay, review all the information. Make sure that the information that we give you for your application window is correct, the application rate on the permit is correct, the amount of pesticides correct, and the number of applications that are permitted are correct, okay? Review the permit conditions. So the permit conditions are where we're going to say, okay, here's where you put your signs. Here's the kind of notification we want you to do. If we have any small things that are needed for that specific site, we will put that in the conditions as well. So if you get 2 or 3 permits from us, the conditions might not be the same on all 3. They're going to be specific to the site. Now, we do have a number of permit conditions that are standard, but we do have some that are very specific. So again, read through, make sure you understand it. If you have any questions, call your specialist up and we can help explain it. Okay, we include these conditions to help reduce the risk of human health impact and environmental impact. Okay, we did put some conditions on for reporting requirements. I don't think I'm going to have too many of those this year. We never really received any calls or complaints about drift or damage, offsite damage. So it looks like whatever's being done is being done really well. So I don't seem to think I'm going to need to put any requests for final reports or anything like that on my permits, unless of course there's a situation that involves us to do so, right? So in the event you have multiple people who are objecting to the process and there's some controversy on that, we may ask for a final report just to have some data on that. Okay, and again, notification requirements for aquatic exterminations are placed on the permit. So that permit condition will tell you what you should do to notify the public. If you disagree with anything that's on the permit, like a condition that we have on there, you can submit to the director, the person who signed the permit, for a reconsideration, but that has to be within 3 days of you getting the permit. Okay, and if the director says, yeah, we'll change it, or yes, you're right, we'll rescind and we'll redo it, or if the director says no, permit condition stands, then you can request a hearing at the Ontario Land Tribunal to get that permit condition changed if you like, but you have to do that within 15 days of contacting the director or the director's decision. I've never been to the land tribunal on this. Typically, we can work it out between us. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the other legislation that might apply. In the past, like I said, we did require you to submit all this stuff for various other agencies for applying for a permit from us. What we found was because those other agencies sometimes take a little longer than we do to get the permits out, we were holding things up because it would take us a week or two to get you the permit, perhaps longer. So by the time you got all the ducks in a row, then you were behind schedule because of us. We can issue the permit without having all these other requirements in place because they're independent of our permit process, right? You still need to do them. So if you are required to do something under the Endangered Species Act of Ontario or the Species at Risk Act of Ontario or the Federal Act, you still have to do all those reviews and still have to get any permits or whatever under that. We just won't ask for them up front. Okay, so we'll still issue you a permit, but again, you are responsible to make sure that you comply with all the other requirements of any other legislation. Okay. Okay, a few things. I'm preaching to the choir here on all these considerations, but just make sure that you're using an integrated pest management system. It's the most successful approach. Again, herbicides are only part of the strategy, but then again, from the sites I've seen and the people I've spoke to, you're well aware of this. Treatment on water is not subject to Ontario's cosmetic pesticide ban, right? The cosmetic pesticide ban only applies to land applications. So if you've got a situation where you've got a water extermination coupled with a land extermination for Phragmites because it's growing up onto dry land, the dry land application is coming under the pesticide ban requirements. The water application is under your permit. Okay, so just be aware that that might change, right? Depending on water levels in the lakes or the marshes that you're in, you may find yourself underwater when you thought you weren't, or on dry land when you expected that to be water. If that's the case, I would really, really strongly suggest that you apply for more area to treat than you think you might need. So if you're estimating that your Phragmites stands might go underwater by the time fall rolls around, include a larger treatment area on your permit application, okay? That way, if you're treating less, it's okay. You just can't treat more than what your permit allows you to do. So just hedge your bets and get a little extra on there just to make sure. Now, if the opposite happens and now it's dry, you're under the pesticide ban. So now you have to use one of the exemptions to the ban, and typically that's a natural resources exemption. Okay, that's section 28 of Reg 6309. Okay, so that would probably apply in that case. Okay, so make sure you have that in place first before you start spraying. Okay, so I think that's all I really had to say. I don't know if we're taking questions now or if we're doing it later.
This one's like, there we go. Hi, Tom. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to take questions after. There are actually a number of questions for you. So during the Q&A, just after Brett's presentation,
Sure,
we'll do all of them. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for that really informative presentation. I always learn a lot from that. So thanks very much. Glad to have you here. And with that, I'd like to invite Brett Norman here onto the stage.
Apologies, I have to switch cameras.
That's okay. Yeah, we got everything working. So yeah, while you're sharing your screen, I can introduce you. So Brett Norman is the Habitat Restoration Program Manager for the Nature Conservancy of Canada. He's focused on Phragmites management in the Long Point coastal wetlands and surrounding area. He's been with NCC for 12 years in a variety of roles, contributing to restoration activities and conservation efforts in Norfolk County. So welcome, Brett.
Thank you very much, and hopefully everyone can see my screen now and not multiples of their own screen.
Looks good.
So thanks for inviting me, and thanks for all those in attendance today. I'm just going to run through the implementation of frag management in the Long Point region. It's going to be from a bit of a 10,000 foot view, but hopefully it provides everyone with some guidance and some considerations as they move through their own processes. So one of the first steps in starting our frag management activities was identifying an area to pilot landscape scale frag management. So that area ultimately was the Long Point region and the coastal wetlands. And there's a few reasons for that. It's one of the remaining coastal wetlands on Lake Erie with natural and hydrological connections and pulses. It's globally, nationally, and provincially recognized with designations from UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, Earth Science and Life Science areas of natural and scientific interest, provincially significant wetland. It's a Ramsar site and an important bird area, among others. It also provides habitat for a high number of wetland-dependent wildlife, including approximately 23 species at risk. And provides a high number of provincially rare species and vegetation communities as well. And so once we've identified a place where we want to work, it's important for us, it was important to identify all of the various partners that might play a role or have in frag management in the area. And so this is identifying the various stakeholders with similar interests, including Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. There are several private hunt clubs along the coastal wetlands of Long Point in the Inner Bay, as well as cottage associations and other local interest groups and NGOs with a vested interest in eradicating Phragmites. And so it's important to identify these groups not only in terms of having collaborators, but also in terms of modifying our language in terms of how do we communicate to the various different interest groups that we might have. So for instance, it's a large cottage area that's popular for boating, hunting, and waterfowl related recreation, and having conversations with those groups might be very different than having conversations with our conservation partners interested in conservation. And so from there, what was NCC's role? So early on in the program, our role was to support the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and Environment and Climate Change Canada and emergency use registration of glyphosate for use in aquatic habitats, being the primary lead for control work on private lands in the Long Point region, both aerial applications, ground applications, supporting and delivering aspects of communication and notification plans, and supporting and participating in the Long Point Phragmites Action Alliance. And so since 2015, the Nature Conservancy of Canada has been working with the Long Point Phragmites Action Alliance, that collaborative group of landowners, which was established in 2015 to implement a collaborative approach to frag management in the Long Point region and address the impacts of Phragmites in this area, protecting the globally significant biodiversity that I had mentioned. And so we had to kind of phase this program over multiple years. It's obviously been ongoing since 2015. And the first phase of this project was primarily focused on management of Phragmites in those coastal wetlands of Long Point and Turkey Point, and involving the landowners in those areas, and then eventually expanding to include other landowners within the Big Creek watershed and surrounding Norfolk County in frag management activities to help protect the investments made in those areas. And so it's kind of a high-level overview of what's been going on in the area. And it all started in 2015 with the assistance of Janice Gilbert and the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, helping to plan projects and develop communication plans, help develop the working group, and working in conjunction with all of our partners that I've mentioned so far. Ooh. And there we go. The next part of this process was we've identified the area that we want to work in. We've identified the individuals and groups that we need to communicate with and collaborate with in terms of management. So the next portion of this program was collecting data and mapping to help inform our work. So a mapping exercise was conducted in collaboration with Ducks Unlimited Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, McMaster University to identify management areas within the coastal wetlands. And in the bottom map there, you'll see a picture of 40-kilometer long sand spit, Long Point. We initially identified 1,328 hectares of Phragmites to be managed within those coastal wetlands, including Turkey Point. And that's almost a 15,000 acre coastal wetland complex between Long Point, Turkey Point, and various hunt clubs in those areas. And in addition to that mapping, we also developed a field maps or field collector project for private and partner land data collection. And so that's the top map you can see, where we're tracking various parcel level information, including permission from landowners to access and manage Phragmites on their lands. And it also helped us to collect information that would be relevant to management of Phragmites. And so that includes things like patch size, density, and hydrological condition, which will all feed into permits and determining what budget requirements might be needed to purchase herbicide or have enough staff contractors to conduct work in those areas. And I'd be remiss without saying that our partners also played a key role in collecting some of that data and assisting with collection of landowner information for that work to occur. So once all the data has been collected, the mapping's been collected, kind of the next logical consideration is the permitting process, which Tom outlined MECP's part wonderfully in the presentation beforehand. So I'm not going to dive into much of the permitting requirements other than to mention that there are a number to be considered, which include aquatic extermination permits from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks for aquatic exterminations. A letter of opinion from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry may be required for applications in terrestrial sites. Request for review from DFO where a project may impact species at risk, just to name a few of the permits that may be required to conduct and implement frag management. And we typically try to gather and collect all of our data and information to apply for those permits in June or July, knowing that we need to apply well in advance to help with our planning and ensure that we have permits in time to support the management activities that we need to do annually. The other portion I want to highlight here is our public notification, which is imperative to successful implementation of a frag management program and is typically required via permit requirements, and there's typically guidance in those permit conditions to outline what public notification needs to look like. But in general, from our experience working in Long Point, it's extremely beneficial to have a coordinated approach with the various partners and contributors that we're collaborating with to find efficiencies and support as a group. So, for instance, it's typically best to have one plan with a few identified leads to help coordinate an efficient public response for any inquiries you might get on the management activities that you're undertaking, rather than having multiple different plans, which can end up confusing the public and causing more confusion than providing information. And so early on in the Long Point program, a lot of this public notification was housed in public notification and implementation plans that were a requirement under the emergency use registration, but we found them extremely helpful even moving forward, not working under an emergency use registration any longer, to help consolidate our plans, identify those that are going to be taking public inquiries and coordinate our notification plans and how information is going out. I also mentioned finding efficiencies and support within the collaborative. So I just want to touch on a few of the different notification types that we've used for public notification. So that's come in the form of newspaper notifications, having implementation and notification plans posted on partner websites, signs posted at marinas and public access points like parks. Tom had a picture of the road sign at Causeway, on the Long Point Causeway, which is the only road leading into the large cottage community on Long Point. So using road signs for folks visiting Long Point, as well as door-to-door notification and letters. So moving on to some other control operations. Once the permits have been applied for, mapping's been put in place, it's important to think of some of the other considerations. So working with the collaborative or as a group, it's important to identify where you can find efficiencies. So for instance, you may need to plan for work that's being plan for your Phragmites management prior to other maintenance needs. So for instance, in drains or road settings, there may be other management requirements that need to take place that could impact the efficacy of your Phrag management. And so it's important to work with those different collaborators in order to find efficiencies and make sure that you're not overlapping in those management activities. And then, as I've mentioned, the mapping, or I should back up. Also, you need to identify contractors well in advance. There are not many contractors available to conduct this work, so ensuring that those are in line prior to any Phrag management implementation that you may be conducting is important, and ensuring that you have the resources to conduct the work and meet the objectives that you're planning for. Having your mapping in place, not only from the perspective of planning for your permits or identifying your treatment areas, but also from the perspective of providing information to contractors is also important. So it will help your contractor and you determine what products or methods need to be used for your various sites, and help plan for project tracking in the long term as well. And you can find a lot of cost savings in doing that pre-planning and mapping with your contractors. And then lastly, identifying your limitations. So I've mentioned identifying your contractors, having mapping in place, and you may find in conducting the implementation that you run into some limitations, such as not having enough contractors or enough resources from an equipment perspective. And so have to identify what those limitations are well in advance so that you can build your resources, maybe by adding staff or purchasing equipment or finding the means to fill in those resource gaps. And then the next is identifying the appropriate tools for implementation and management. So in the Long Point project, herbicide application has been the favored management tool. It provides a high efficacy for treatment, and it allows for larger areas to be treated in a short amount of time. So when we're working at hundreds of hectares at a time, it's the most efficient means for treatment. Some of the downsides is that it may require specialized aquatic extermination license and specialized equipment, and it can be costly to conduct in aquatic situations. Some other options or tools is utilizing cut to drown, which can be used in situations where herbicide is unavailable, such as due to label restrictions or proximity to drinking water sources, and it can be labor intensive as well. So need to kind of build on the toolbox and identify the tools needed for your various activities that you need to conduct, and those will evolve over time. So it's important to have as many tools and resources available as possible to conduct your implementation and follow the best management practice guidance. And so I mentioned that herbicide application was the favored management tool in the Long Point area. When applied properly, it's an effective tool at eliminating both above and below ground biomass, so controlling root rhizomes that contribute to the spread of Phragmites. For us, this is typically conducted between August and October as the plant's preparing to winter and drawing resources into the roots. So herbicide is most effectively drawn into the roots at this time, providing a high degree of efficacy. And I put this slide up also just to share some of the costs on the various herbicide application methods that you might consider. So aquatic extermination is quite costly, utilizing a imazapyr product, and terrestrial can be a little less expensive. So going back to the mapping, it's important to know what that hydrological condition is. Are you treating in a terrestrial area or an aquatic environment? And is there cost savings to be had if you can treat frag in a terrestrial setting? And being cognizant that those conditions can change over time, and that proper planning needs to be in place with contractors to switch between those herbicides as well. And I'll just jump into now some of the tools used in the Long Point region for the management that we've conducted to date. So I mentioned early on aerial application. I won't dwell on this one, but some of the highlights is that it's great for treating large areas quickly with minimal impact and a high degree of accuracy. And we'll look at some of the mapping a little bit later on in the presentation. The downside is that herbicide buffers based on label restrictions may limit the treatment area. There's additional time required for calibration of equipment. And when conducting aerial application, you should try to stage close to your treatment area to maximize that treatment area. So helicopters only have a certain amount of weight that they can carry. And so the further they have to fly, the more fuel they have, the less herbicide they'll be able to apply. And so in our case, as I mentioned, we'll look at some of the aerial mapping that was done a little later on, but we were using GPS-based software to control spray brooms. So as the helicopter flies over, our uploaded GPS data that is on board the helicopter, the helicopter identifies it's flying over a patch of Phragmites, turns the boom off, shuts it off when it exits the area. Have to be cognizant of using the proper nozzles with course classification to control drift, and be cognizant of the other details with this application, such as height of spray. So we had a max height of 3 meters and a max aircraft speed of 60 kilometers an hour to help control drift and to make sure we're applying the herbicide effectively. And obviously following our permit restrictions, conducting application with winds less than 16 kilometers per hour. And then the next method that we've used is groundside application with amphibious vehicles. And this is where NCC has led a lot of work in the Long Point area. So in this case, we've got a couple of marsh masters depicted conducting ground herbicide application. Each marsh master has 2 operators on board that are trained in detecting and identifying species at risk in sensitive habitats. We're mitigating our impacts through constant observations for SAR and providing the appropriate buffers for them, as well as low rates of travel, less than 2 kilometers per hour. And crews are consistently in radio contact to share this information as they're working, as well as identifying treatment areas and best routes as they're navigating through sensitive habitats. And so positives with this application method is that there's relatively light disturbance, as the machines are designed for marsh use, and have a low compaction rate of less than 2 pounds per square inch. This method is capable of targeting challenging areas that helicopters or other management options may not be able to reach, especially when there's other vegetation types or dense frag that needs to be navigated through. And as I mentioned, it's a targeted application. The negatives are that it is a light impact on the landscape. This is a tracked vehicle moving through sensitive areas, so we have to have highly skilled and trained operators to conduct this work. It can have an impact on the effectiveness of your application. So as you can see in the one picture to the right, we're traveling through a fairly dense stand of Phragmites and obviously crushing some of the stems that we're traveling through. And so there's the possibility to break stems or crush them into the water in aquatic instances where it may rinse herbicide off of the plant. So that's where we see, while not a lot of retreatment, that's where we see most of our retreatment needs are in those track lines. And it can also be labor intensive. Some other methods that we've used are application of herbicide through John boat and backpack spraying. So these are best for small patches of retreatment or areas where the terrain makes it unsafe for other options. So in the instance of the John boat picture here, this is treating at Long Point in one of the channels, and the frag depicted there is on a channel berm, so it's quite high with steep slopes. And you can see some logs and stumps in the background there. So it's an area that's unsafe for operators to take large equipment, and it's easier to access by boat using our spray equipment. And you can see the QR 400 sprayer depicted there, which is mounted on the Marshmasters as well. As far as backpack treatment is concerned, the picture we have here is 5 years post-treatment in one of the coastal wetlands of Long Point. So you can see there's native vegetation returning to an area that was previously fully infested with Phragmites, and obviously we don't want to impact that native vegetation. We want to have very targeted application of any remaining Phragmites to ensure that there are no future infestations in that area. And the other method that we've used, and I'm already a little bit, is using truck stores to conduct cut to drown. So this is, in this particular instance, herbicide application wasn't permitted due to proximity to the Port Rowan water intake. And so cut to drown, cutting frag as close to the base of the lake to drown it out was the best method for managing this patch that was approximately 2 hectares in size. And so Janice and the Invasive Phragmites Control Center assisted with this. And you can see in the before and after picture, particularly at the after picture, there's a little bit of Phragmites left there. Again, going back to the having trained and skilled operators that are identifying species at risk. During our management here, we had identified a species at risk while management was occurring. And so that patch or that area was left until a later date when the species had moved on. So we're providing minimal disturbance and ensuring that we're not affecting any species at risk and still managing frag at an effective time. And then building on the tools in the toolbox, NCC, in partnership with Environment and Climate Change Canada, has been supporting biocontrol research in the hopes that this can be another tool eventually to help us minimize the impacts of frag on the landscape. And so I just wanted to provide this as an example of building on that toolbox and having as many tools available as possible. You can see the borer holes in the one picture to the left, some stunted growth of Phragmites in that center picture, and the designs used for releasing larvae in the far right picture there. As part of conducting inspection on the landscape with equipment, NCC requires clean equipment protocol to be followed as part of all of our work. And so we build this into our contracts as a requirement, and we budget for it appropriately. Budgets should be in place to accommodate these good practices and support our contractors in conducting good work on the landscape. And it's just kind of the cost of doing business. It's money well spent compared to addressing future management due to the inadvertent spread of invasive species. And so this is conducted on site and between sites when we're conducting our management activities in Long Point. And next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about project tracking and how we track our management activities. And I've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but to provide a little more detail, the map you see with all the orange and green is a map of our aerial GPS tracking at Turkey Point. And so all of the orange lines that you see are helicopter flight paths that were flown in conducting that herbicide application, and the green areas are where we've identified frag polygons and had those uploaded to the GPS software on the helicopter. So the green is where that boom sprayer turned on and then turned off as the helicopter exited that frag polygon. The map at the top, or picture at the top with the blue, is depicting some of our ground herbicide application tracking. So at NCC, we use a product called STA Logger, which is a hardware mounted to our QR400 sprayers I mentioned previously in the John boat. There was a picture of it. And the hardware is mounted to the spray trigger. So it's a very accurate means of collecting data while in the field and conducting the work. So each time an operator or an exterminator depresses the trigger of the QR400, the STA logger will take a GPS point, which can be manually set for either 1, 5, or 10 seconds for continuous points as the trigger is depressed. And so those are the larger blue areas that you see. And it also collects track lines, so we can see all of our movement throughout the area in which we're working. And then below, we saw an early on picture of the collector project depicting landowner, the data collection for landowner information. This is once all of our surveys have been done within the phase 1 of the Big Creek watershed, which was one of our initial phases. And so each color in that rainbow colored map represents a different permission, a different treatment type, is tracking our control and management activities over multiple years. And it's hard to see, but there's also points on there collecting that individual patch density size as well, and requirements for retreatment year over year. And so on top of the GPS data and the collection of that treatment information, we're also collecting data for our reporting requirements, including the amount of herbicide being applied, the weather conditions, all those various requirements that we're required to report on and have in place as part of our management activities. And as always, it's good to follow measurement practices and monitoring. So it's a good practice to follow up herbicide application with cutting or rolling, which helps to reduce the standing dead biomass and improve site visibility for retreatment efficacy. So if all the dead biomass has been rolled down, it's easier to see any regrowth for retreatment. Cutting and rolling work should not occur for a minimum of 3 weeks after application. It's best to provide the most time possible to allow sufficient transport of herbicide through the plant. And this work for us is typically conducted from November through March, depending on weather and permit requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, we try to incorporate this into other actions like drain clearing or road maintenance as part of a collaborative approach. Monitoring is also a critical part of frag management, so helping to determine the efficacy of your treatment, which may vary depending on how established a population is, what the site conditions and weather were surrounding treatment time. So management may be required for multiple years, and it's good to monitor those sites to ensure we're following up in the best way possible. And so just a little bit on what our accomplishments have been. So at the top of the presentation, I mentioned we initially mapped 1,328 hectares of invasive Phragmites in the coastal wetlands of Long Point. And Phragmites, like all other invasives, can be a bit cryptic. So we've far exceeded that. To date, we have managed 2,123 hectares, or 5,248 acres of restored coastal wetlands. So that's almost a third of the entire coastal wetland complex that was previously infested with invasive Phragmites. And so we definitely feel this project's worth celebrating. It may be the largest habitat restoration project in Canada and possibly the most biodiverse corner of the country. So the conservation impact is unparalleled, and I couldn't be more proud of what we've done. I also want to share that the model that I've shared with the implement at Long Point in terms of management of Phragmites has also been expanded to include other invasive species. So in this map, all of our yellow hatching is where frag management has occurred, and you can see that management extending up into the Big Creek watershed, and it has extended across Norfolk County beyond the scope of this map. But we've also taken that model for other invasive species and began management in other areas, and that's that red hatching that you can see on this map. So the model is definitely transferable across species. And I have to take time to thank all of the support that we've had from our various partners, including Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, the Ministry of Conservation and Parks, Norfolk County, the Long Point Basin Land Trust, the Long Point Region Conservation Authority, among many other NGOs who have worked to make this a successful program. And with that, I'll say thank you and provide a little bit of hope. This picture is taken at the Crown Marsh in Long Point. Basically, everything that you see as water in this picture was previously infested with invasive Phragmites, and is now has native species in it, and has become a functional habitat that species can utilize and move throughout more freely. And so, just an awesome success story. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Brett. It was great to hear about such a success story and the accomplishments in that region. So now we are ready for our Q&A. So there are a number for Brett and our other speakers. So I'll just have all our speakers invited back onto the stage, and we can go through questions. So we have, again, quite a bit of time to go through questions today. We'll just give it another minute. All right. So one question here, is there a suggested contact to reach out to confirm if SAR, SARA, or ESA permits are required for your sites, and will those details be found in the guide? I know that the OIPC, we do have a table on permitting, so it is in our BMP. There's a website you can go to. Maybe Kyle.
Well, yeah, I don't have as much experience on this one, so maybe I'm going to defer to either Brett or Tom.
Yeah, the Species at Risk program has a website. I think you guys have that in your guide.
Yeah.
It kind of runs you through like the requirements to look to see if you meet the requirements. I'm not too familiar with that legislation, but yeah, I do know they have that up there, and there's an email address, I think, also on the website.
Yeah. So yeah, take a look at our table on applicable legislation and permitting in the BMP, and it's been recently updated. So the most current link is there. How long after herbicide treatment should a burn take place to remove biomass? Do root systems need to be excavated?
Yeah, so I can jump in on this one. At very least, a minimum of 3 weeks. I would suggest that's probably not even long enough. You want to give time for any herbicide application to be translocated to the roots. So try to give that frag as long as possible. For us, burns typically don't occur in the fall. We're typically aiming for the beginning of March, depending on weather and the various species at risk activities that we're seeing. So a year like this, for instance, we may not be able to conduct a burn, but aiming for this time of year typically after our initial treatment to do a burn. And root systems do not need to be excavated. The bonus or the point of a herbicide application is to have that herbicide pulled into the roots to help kill off both the above ground biomass and the roots in the plant.
Or is there anyone else? There? Okay. What is the best approach to reestablish native plants within an isolated area? Can native plants such as cattail be planted on top of the dead rhizome or underground frag biomass?
I'll jump in on this one. And this is similar to a question that came up yesterday as well about reestablishing native plants. Typically, with natural areas that we're seeing, say Long Point, for example, where you really do have these strong seed banks that are good for up to 20 years. So chances are when you're removing that frag, some of the rolling that Brett was talking about as well, it allows the light to kind of hit below once that frag's dead, allowing germination of some of the seeds from the seed bank. So, for the most part, through discussions with researchers at University of Waterloo as well, with respect to doing native planting, some of the recommendations they had, if you're looking at, getting some structure on the landscape, if it's, typically if it's better for areas that are disturbed sites, say roadside, where you don't have that native seed bank that's really dense, or disturbed areas like that, or ones that don't have that natural seed source, or ones to consider for planting afterwards. Using annual plants in the interim, in the short term, is good in case you have to do any retreatment. Any perennials that you have, you could end up negatively impacting. So just that might be a good approach early on, but a lot of the sites that we've seen are pretty resilient in terms of once you knock back that frag, that native seed bank is coming back.
At a municipality, if you have a contractor applying pesticides over water and they did the permit, who is responsible for reporting?
Oh yeah, this one's mine. So the person whose name is on the permit is responsible for making sure that permit is followed. So for example, if Brett hires Kyle to do an application and Kyle applies for the permit is issued to the person who applies for it. So Kyle's name will be on the permit. He'd be responsible for making sure that all those conditions are followed, including any reporting requirements. Okay, so if something were to happen, he were to drift and damage property, he is solely responsible for that. Now, what happens sometimes is if the municipality applies for the permit and one of their licensed exterminators applies for it, signs for it, and the permit's given to them and they subcontract someone else to do it, they have to give them a copy of the permit. And if that person messes up, then the municipality is responsible as well as the person who applied it. Okay, so there's a transfer of liability there. So it kind of depends on what you want to do. If the municipality applies it and subcontracts it, or if you want to have the person who is applying it apply for the permit and then have their name on it. There's different ways of doing it, and different people do it different ways.
I think this one's for you too. If a municipality has staff that applies to a pond on municipal property, would that be reason for an aquatic extermination license exception, or would this be a different case?
Yeah, so that might be a little bit of a different case depending, right? So if they might have an exemption for that if the municipality owns the entire land, but just to be on the safe side, I wouldn't play that game, right? I would have all my guys licensed, and if they're applying, and anything happens, then you know you've got a licensed person applying the pesticide, right? Typically, we see that with municipalities and using like domestic products, right? So if they're using a domestic product for control of weeds or something like that, they do have an exemption from a license for that. And those domestic products don't hold as much risk as commercial products do. From a risk management standpoint, have all your guys licensed so they know exactly how to apply it, know exactly what to do. So there could be an exemption, but I wouldn't do that.
In remote areas like Northern Ontario, can remote sensing techniques be used to map Phragmites occurrences?
Sure. And yeah, you pretty much hit most of it there, Brett. And it really is, an effective tool for when you have a lot on the landscape event, especially. You do have differences in what the patches or the populations of frag look like, if it's roadside versus mixed in trees and canopy versus out in a coastal wetland. So Southwestern Ontario, we're pretty effective, I'd say, seeing it by eye, looking through even just Google Maps at this point. But it's very distinct. It's hard to say. It could be a very costly venture to take on, but especially with the north as well, having such a lower amount, prioritizing areas like roadways and then higher impact areas like closer to municipal areas or communities or popular recreational areas, that might be a good step when it comes to that initial work. But there's definitely remote sensing work going on. I believe Thunder Bay, there's work going on in Thunder Bay, I'm pretty sure, but it's typically smaller scale in that sense.
Do you know if there's a group like yours operating in Quebec?
So, sure, I'll jump in on this one, and Vicky, maybe I'll bug you for this, but I tried to do a quick Google search while we were just sitting here, and I wasn't able to find anything particular. But similar to Ontario's Invasive Plant Council, there's an invasive, I don't know if it's invasive plant or invasive species council for Quebec as well. It would be best to likely start with groups like checking websites for groups like that. Getting in touch with the local ministry for the Natural Resources Ministry for Quebec as well would be a good starting point. But unfortunately, I don't have any information. We've been informing folks within NCC of some of the work that we're doing, some of our staff in Quebec, but much more lower profile when it comes to this type of management right now.
Mm-hmm. And for Tom, are aquatic extermination permits required when the treatment is happening on federal lands or waters?
I qualified yes. So places like a Trent Severn waterway, yes. Like military bases, yes. One of the reasons for that, there's two reasons for that. One, laws of general application in the province do apply to federal lands. And because exterminators need to purchase product, they need their license to do that. So they are licensed by the province and have to follow the laws and regulations of the province. So in that particular case, in like 90% of the situations, yes. On federal lands, you do require a permit from us.
And what removal methods have you found to be the most effective on beachfront in on land, sand, but near water?
Yeah, so this is our bread and butter in Long Point, managing Phragmites on beachfronts or sand. Obviously, the one that we've leaned on is herbicide application. We found it to be very effective. We've obviously used cut to drown in certain situations, and we found that very effective as well. The big restriction with that is the depth of the water that you have to work with, and the lakes can fluctuate greatly. So you have to be cognizant of that when planning your activities. But overall, herbicide application has been very effective.
Have you done any spading on land?
We haven't done a whole lot of spading. It's best used for smaller populations of frag, and we've been obviously dealing in hundreds of hectares most years, and so it's not the most efficient method for us in terms of conducting management activities. But I do know of others within NCC who have used it in certain situations and found it quite successful. So.
Any recommendations for roadside spray equipment or have good contacts for potential sourcing?
Yeah, so we've definitely done, as part of the landscape scale approach, in Long Point, we've been involved with Norfolk County conducting roadside spraying. The equipment that NCC and our contractors use is typically a pickup truck with the required lighting on it, and there are permit conditions around road applications that need to be followed, especially if you're thinking of larger roads that may be managed by MTO. So be cognizant of those permit conditions, but the equipment used is typically a pickup truck with the QR 400 sprayer, like what was in the John boat depicted in the presentation, mounted in the bed, and it's crew working in conjunction along the roadsides to conduct that application. The other effective that we have used for smaller patches is backpack spraying. So just having a pickup truck with backpacks in order to travel around and conduct that management. So as for contacts, we've used Giles Restoration Services in Norfolk County. I believe on other areas for NCC, Greenstream has been another contractor that has been utilized, and I'm sure there's others out there as well that have conducted the management activities. And maybe Kyle knows of a few others, but.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good overview. There's, and I believe the OIPC you had, I know in the past you had like a contractors list, and I'm pretty sure the bigger players are there. Another organization, and you know, maybe this is something, Tom, that do people, I don't know if people reach out to you guys at all. I don't want to make a precedent for that, but it might be something of interest. But I know there was a contractors list that the YPC used to have on their website as well.
Yeah.
We don't do that, unfortunately. We can't give lists out of contractors unless in case we miss somebody, right? So we have to be fair and impartial in terms of the information we provide. So we typically suggest they go to other sources for that.
Perfect, great. My other suggestion would be maybe checking out the Ontario Vegetation Management Association, reaching out to them as well. And there's quite a few of the applicators that work on Phragmites that do receive training through that association and are part of it.
Yeah, and we do have that same issue. Like we have a list that we give out, but it's not exhaustive, and kind of stress that we don't endorse any of the people there or have checked like the quality of their work. So it's just like information purposes. We have given that out. Yeah. What would be your recommendations for someone looking for a career change into invasive species management who has nature experience but no formal science restoration education? So some career advice.
Great. I'll jump in a little bit. I mean, you know, it's luckily one of those things where you know, bringing a lot of outside perspective can, you know, it's like any job. You're bringing tools even if you don't have the experience. My first thought, if there's no interest in going through any formal education, getting out, volunteering, or you know, even starting to work on different crews, you know, working for nonprofits that are doing this type of work. Conservation authorities are great for this too. You know, if it's you know, through that process, getting your licensing and stuff too. If you're looking to become an applicator, for example, going more the school route as well. I mean, I would say, looking at a college diploma program is probably a first, good step. Not, you don't necessarily need to get too deep into the weeds, I guess. But it's really, your passion is probably going to drive you in different directions. So taking that in mind and just meeting and chatting with people, it still thankfully is that type of field where, making those connections and it's a pretty small group, I think, in relative terms. So just, get out and engage as much as you can.
Oh, great. Any other advice, Tom or Britt? Awesome, thanks. What is my regional specialist in the Prescott-Russell Township?
Sure, that's Tim Hanna, HANNAH. I'm just going to throw his
Sure, yeah, maybe
phone number in the chat here. For some reason, it's not letting me put anything in the chat, so I'll just throw it in the Q&A.
Sure, yeah, at the bottom. And where can we find the site location list of important details to include? There was a lot of info presented and not enough time to copy it all.
Yeah, and I think that was my bad. So we do have a permit application guide in draft form that can be provided. So if you need a copy of it, you can just email me, and I'll just put my email in the chat.
Okay, and there's another question for you. If you could, they could have the link for applying for the permit.
There is no link, unfortunately. We would love to have that, like a central site. We don't. So it's just each individual specialist. You'll have to just apply to them for it here.
Oh, another question for you, Tom. I'll do this one.
Sure.
Can you break down the permit application timelines, please? You mentioned that applying in September may be too late. I'm assuming you mean for treatment the following year.
For treatment that year. So you want to apply, if you can, like June, July, August the latest. In terms of review, so we're doing other permits at the same time, right? So we're doing West Nile permits, aquatic exterminations of other types, fumigations of other types, a lot of different stuff goes on. So our permit season runs really heavy from April all the way to September, right? And that includes Phragmites. Our turnaround times on the permit guides, it'll say 50 days, but we can usually turn that around in a week or two, right? But the more permits we have to deal with, you go into a triage, right? When West Nile virus permits get done first, because it's a 5-day turnaround for us on those, right? So any West Nile comes in, you get pushed back, right, until we get those done. So if you apply for them in the year you need them, that's fine. You can apply in like June, July, August, and we'll get them processed as fast as possible. We don't process a year in advance, and permits are only good for 1 year. So the permit guide also talks a little bit about that too. So just send me an email and I'll send you a copy.
Oh, great. And is there somewhere where I can print an information sheet and drop off in someone's mailbox? This sheet could have general info and references. Is this a good idea? I know for us, yes. There's the MNRF fact sheet on Phragmites that just provides general information. So we're sometimes asked about that, and that you could print out and give to people. People have done that in the past in their communities. If anyone has anything to add to that one. Okay. But yeah, we go to our website, and I believe it's on the ISC website, or type MNRF fact sheet Phragmites, and it should come up. Where to whom can contractors go to get training for properly performing frag removal?
That is a great question. And I don't know if there's anywhere specific right now, but it's something, as one of the things that we've been discussing with our partners, with respect to frag control, and if we're able to expand to do more landscape work, is the need to have more of this, specific and specialized training for dealing with frag, and especially for working in sensitive habitats as well. So, Brett, I don't know if you or Tom, if you have anything to add here, but it is something that would be great to get off the ground if it isn't already.
Yeah, for pesticide training and stuff, we used to have other programs that were for like structural pest management and for landscape stuff. I think there may still be some around, but I haven't seen any specific for like invasive species, stuff like that. So you're kind of restricted to what we have for our training materials in terms of pesticide use, which, would be honest, they're a little lacking, right? Because they're just basically the theory stuff, like I mentioned in the presentation. Yeah, I think that the best place to go for training is people who know how to do it. So maybe the people who are currently doing the Phragmites control, you guys have a lot of experience in it now. And that might be something, if as a group, if you look forward to putting on, I guess, presentations like these and stuff like this really helps. But in terms of hands-on stuff, unfortunately, you don't seem to have it right now. But that definitely is something to look forward to, and maybe to kind of as a group put out an idea of how to do it.
That's a great suggestion. I know that's something Janice Gilbert often says too, is about like getting experience for people on the ground. That's great. This question's for Kyle. How much is your budget for cleaning equipment? Do you provide the equipment to clean the equipment? It looks like there was a pressure washer on site.
So when it comes to our equipment, when we're doing our own clean equipment protocol, we do have a pressure washer and other materials, but I am going to pass this over to Brett. Brett is basically our in-house expert. He's been running this program for quite a while and can give you the ins and outs.
Yeah, so for as far as budget is concerned, it definitely varies season to season depending on the number of sites you're moving to and from, how many times you're going to have to clean the equipment, for instance. But typically, I build a day in for each site for clean equipment costs. It typically takes a full day of cleaning out tracks and washing the machine thoroughly to make sure that there's no material left on the machine before transport. And we do have equipment that we provide for our own work in terms of pressure washers and pumps, as Kyle's alluded to, in order to conduct clean equipment protocols on site. Contractors will typically also provide some of their own equipment for those activities as well, for their own equipment. So.
And for Brett, what herbicide did you use?
Yeah, so this has been an evolving program in Long Point. So you would have caught initially in the presentation, we were working under an emergency use registration for Roundup Custom, which is not a product that is registered in Canada for use. But that was what we had access to at the early stages of this program when Habitat Aqua wasn't registered for use in Canada. Now that Habitat Aqua is registered for use, it's the main product we use in aquatic situations. For terrestrial sites, there's a number of various products. So there's glyphosate products like Vision Max for terrestrial use, as well as other Mazapure products, such as Arsenal Powerline, that can be used in terrestrial circumstances, depending on your site conditions and label restrictions. So.
And for Brett, would you be able to share your action plan?
Yeah, so that's another challenging one. So this has been a very organic program and has obviously taken a lot of flexibility in order to implement such a large landscape scale plan. So we have, there are a few documents that I can point to, and I believe these can be found online, but the Long Point Walsingham Forest Priority Place Integrated Conservation Action Plan will hold some information as far as identifying Phragmites as a threat in the Long Point area. There's also plans as far as implementation and notification plans, and I believe our private lands plan as well on the Long Point Phragmites Action Alliance website, which is Long Point Phragmites Action Alliance.ca. And so I encourage you to visit those, or I can even maybe throw my email in the chat, and folks can reach out if they want more information regarding what we've done. So
great. And for Tom, just to confirm, when there is no water running in the municipal ditches, we don't need a permit to spray.
I am happy to confirm that that is correct, so long as the pesticide you're using is registered for use over water. That makes my job easier and your job easier, trust me.
Great. And Truckster versus Marsh Master, pros and cons.
Well,
Kyle, I see you unmuted first, so I'll throw
I'm always excited about these types of questions. There's always, and it's probably Colin Casson that there's always one that it's, if two invasives were in the same pond, who would beat who? And it's like water chestnut and water soldier or something. Those are always fun. But yeah, you know, like they're different tools for different jobs. As far as, you know, the truck saws themselves are typically, you know, a little bit lower sitting in the water. They're used for, you know, that underwater cutting typically and collecting for boats. I think Janice does use hers for herbicide application as well. I'm personally biased to Marshmasters just from my own experience getting to drive around on those mini tanks. But yeah, I can't add very much. I'm just excited that these questions keep coming up. So Brett, I'll maybe push it over to you.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right off the beginning there, Kyle. It's different equipment for different uses, and it's all building a tool for the toolbox, right? So there's definitely instances where a truck sawer is going to be more adept than a Marshmaster, and vice versa. Again, and I'll lean on Kyle's comment, my personal experience with Marshmasters and conducting herbicide application does give you a little bit extra height, especially when you're working on managing very dense and tall stands of Phragmites. But each has a role to play. So I can't say that there's, you know, pros and cons or versus in terms of the equipment to be used. It's each for its own specific use and for specific sites.
Okay.
Yeah. And maybe to that too, just with pros thinking about difficult site access. I had the, I guess it's the fortunate or unfortunate experience, if you'd like, with working with Eric Giles this fall and getting into some pretty gnarly sites that, you know, would be put a lot of damage into a lot of different equipment. But, you know, the Marshmaster did really well, you know, kind of traversing different types of landscape and getting through some really woody areas as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. I think we are narrowing down our questions here. I don't see too many. So a question about the information sheet, I could provide that a link after. Tom, can you confirm who the main contact would be for the Peterborough MECP? Thank you. Not sure if you.
Yep, that's Tim Hanna again.
Tim
Same
Hanna.
number that I put in the chat. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's all the questions. So thank you so much for all of our speakers, all of you, and answering all those questions. So that kind of wraps up today. And I hope everyone found these past 2 days really informative and learned a lot, and especially with our theme of the collaborative approach, that you get a better idea of managing frag on sort of that landscape level, and maybe made some new connections. So we'll be going into the networking. So we hope that you guys will stick around too for networking. Yeah, so thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and thanks again, Tom and Brett, for you know, taking time out of your day to be here today, and thanks, Vicky, for the hosting.
Hey, not a problem. I'm afraid I'm going to have to take off, but if you need me for anything, my email's in the chat, so feel free to give me a shout.
Great.
Okay, I think we're just gonna wrap it up for today. So again, I'm just gonna reiterate, thank you so much for our speakers today. It was really, really great and informative session, as well as our really interactive Q&A. I'm just gonna let Vicky, I think Vicky's just gonna give us a couple closing remarks, and then I'll just gives a couple instructions on how our networking time is going to work.
Sure. Just wanted to share. We just have the slide just to show our emails. If you would like to contact any of us organizers today, our emails are there.
Vicki, you just got to switch the displays again. Display settings, swap it.
There we go. You see it now? Okay, great. So yeah, so just our emails are here. And just wanted to say thanks again to all of our speakers. It was a great 2 days. And again, if you're interested in completing the quiz for the certificate of completion, Emily will provide that in the chat. And please complete our evaluation survey and stick around for networking. So that's all I have for today.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Vicki. So the event is technically going to be open for the next hour until 4:30. We do encourage you to stick around and chat with I think some of our presenters will be able to stick around for most of the time. But I do encourage you to chat with someone that you might be interested in connecting with. The Remo floor plan is interactive, so you can jump around to the different tables simply by double-clicking an available seat at that table. I'll be around as well to answer any questions about anything regarding like the final quiz or the post-event survey or anything like that. Other than that, thank you so much again for joining us, and I'm going to send us back to the floor.